Hello, this is Glen at SwitchUp, here today to review Deep Ones for you. Many thanks to sometimes you, the developers, for the review copy. Now this is another game with a retro aesthetic, but this particular aesthetic comes from a time before the NES was even a twinkle in Nintendo's eye. In fact, it comes from a machine that was a competitor of this, the Commodore 64. So which machine am I talking about, and is the game any good? Let's find out. The story of Deep Ones is simple and uncomplicated. Whilst out in your submarine, you find yourself incapacitated by some green slime, and your sub is then promptly taken by a huge sea monster, leaving you to fend for yourself in the ocean floor. I'm assuming that the titular Deep Ones are based on the creatures from H.P. Lovecraft mythology, which, if they are, makes this the second eShop game in a number of weeks to be based on Lovecraft after the recent Tesla vs Lovecraft. Story is not something I will be judging this game on, as even the best platformers rarely give this area too much fault. After all, how many times has Princess Peach been captured by Bowser now in the Super Mario series? At least give Wart another chance. Anyway, I digress. We're experiencing an era in gaming where what was old is now new again, and retro graphics are very much in fashion. Unfortunately, it does feel like the retro well is starting to run a little dry, and the style that games such as Shovel Knight brought back to life is now going a little stale. Well, Deep Ones has found a way to continue the retro revival without following the crowd, and they've done that by using graphics that evoke memories of the ZX Spectrum. For those of you that are unaware, the ZX Spectrum was an 8-bit home computer developed by Sinclair Research and released in the UK on the 23rd of April 1982. Although the Spectrum could display 49,152 pixels on the screen, it could only colour in 8x8 blocks due to the computer being designed mainly with text-based functions in mind, although it was a general computer. This led to a problem known as colour clash, and game developers needing to find inventive ways of circumventing the issue. Some examples of this included using mainly monochrome foregrounds with coloured borders, or using large colourful graphics but reducing movement to 8x8 resolution boundaries. This is of course barely scratching the surface of what the Spectrum was all about, and there are videos out there that will explain this in much more detail than I could, but I just wanted to give you a brief taste of the system that had inspired this game. Deep Ones goes for the regularly seen Spectrum colours of yellow, turquoise, green and red against a black background, a classic Spectrum image. It's a lovely homage to an iconic system from the past and made this feel like an until now undiscovered gem from 30 odd years ago. Everything from the bright coloured fish swimming past to the cast of pirates that turn up later look great in this form as far as I'm concerned. If you are well and truly over the retro aesthetic, or were never into it to begin with, then you should probably knock about 10 points off of this section. But I love the style of this game and respect the developers looking past the more established 8-bit style of the NES for something a little different. Being the retro fan that I am, I give graphics 14 out of 20. The music was not what I expected at all. I assumed that to fit the Spectrum theme, there would be chiptune renditions of each musical track in the game. However, the music is altogether more modern, which is a little jarring at first, but although a strange choice, it's made all the easier to swallow by the fact that the music is very good. It's atmospheric when it needs to be and swashbuckling when the action picks up. I was very pleasantly surprised by the music, although one slight negative is that a couple of the tracks towards the end of the game are on a very short loop, which is a shame as it just drops the overall standard a little. I'll be quiet now and let you have a listen to some of it. Sound effects are a bit more in line with the Spectrum aesthetic and are suitably bleepy, and music overall gets 13 out of 20. Deep Ones is a platformer for the most part, although it does throw the occasional change in gameplay style in, such as having to escape from a shark whilst on the back of a seahorse, or shooting a cannon at pirate ships in a first-person perspective. There is even some stealth play towards the end of the game. You gain a harpoon gun early on and can use this to eliminate enemies that stand in your way. The platforming starts at an extremely basic level, but does ramp up as the game goes on to include moving platforms, ones with spikes, and platforms controlled by levers. There are also a number of boss fights, mainly against pirates further into the game, and these can be pretty tough. There are fairly regular checkpoints, so you will never lose too much progress should you succumb to one of these many hazards, and reaching a checkpoint refills the free hit points that the game allows you. Although some of the level design is a little uninspired, I have to admit the gameplay is a lot better than I had anticipated it being. There are occasional spikes in difficulty, and the controls, which we'll get to in a moment, do their best at times to try and ruin the fun that you could be having with the game. Everything is very slow, and I can see this being a major issue for some people, but I think that if you approach the game in the right way, you won't be dashing through these levels speedrunner style, then you may be willing to forgive the slow-paced nature. If you like your platformers to be thrill a minute, never let go of the run button experiences, this game isn't for you. In fact, this game doesn't even have a run button, although you can perform a quick dash manoeuvre in certain sections, but you know what I mean. You do not complete a level as such, the game is one long experience, but you can turn it off at any point and load to your last checkpoint. The gameplay is actually fairly solid, if a little unremarkable, and gets 12 out of 20. The controls of Deep Ones are unfortunately the game's biggest weakness, and by quite a distance too. The two biggest issues come with the jumping and the shooting, which are both quite delayed. The jump is not quite as delayed as the shooting mechanic, which I will get to in a minute, but it is not quite as instant as it needs to be. The other major issue with the jump is that sometimes it does not seem to register. The amount of times I walked towards the edge of a platform, pressed jump, only to fall to my doom was quite frustrating, and in the end I almost ended up jumping and then moving whilst in the air to avoid this from happening. This goes against every instinct that 30 years of accumulated muscle memory have taught me about jumping in platform games. As touched upon, the shooting is also very delayed. This seems intentional, as it feels like once you have pressed the button, the character then brings his arm up to shoot, which delays the shot. If it was intentional, however, it was a very ill-conceived idea. Another major misstep from the developers was not allowing you to shoot whilst jumping. I guess you could say that the slow movements really do give the feeling that you are underwater, but if I wanted that level of realism, I would have donned diving gear myself and jumped into the deep blue. Controls are certainly not broken, but they are not responsive as they should be, and as already mentioned, they do their best to try and ruin the fun you're having. Some people will understandably not be able to look past these flaws, and unfortunately controls get 8 out of 20. Deep Ones costs £4.49 or $4.49 and currently has a pre-order offer of 10% off until the 11th of April. I half expected this to be about an hour long at most, but the game actually took me around 4 hours to complete. There are no collectibles in the game, so any replayability will come down to having to get an urge to play through it again further down the line. I think I probably would boot this up every 6 months or so to have another go at it, and for the price you're paying, I think the 3 to 5 hours it will take most people to finish is more than reasonable. Value gets 13 out of 20. To conclude, Deep Ones will not be for everyone and was probably made with a certain, quite small demographic in mind, and I'm sure most of you will by now know if you fall into this demographic or not. Perhaps this is a game that you need to be wearing rose-tinted glasses for a long since past era of gaming to get maximum enjoyment out of, but being the proud owner of such a pair of glasses, I enjoyed my time with this game. This is the third game that I've reviewed from Sometimes You after their previous efforts North and Metropolis Lux Obscura, and although they clearly work on the low budget, unpolished end of the scale, their games do seem to be getting better with each iteration. If the Spectrum was your thing, or you are remotely curious to play a game inspired by this era, then less than £5 or $5 isn't the biggest risk you'll ever take. Just be wary of the slow pace and the poor controls. This is to gamers what Marmite is to sandwich lovers, and Deep Ones gets a SwitchUp score of 60%. Now that I've been hit with a wave of nostalgia, is a developer out there willing to make a classic old school text adventure game for the Switch? Because I'd be all over that. Thank you for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed. If you did, leave a like and please consider subscribing for more of all things Switch all the time. Happy gaming.